Welcome back to the Autoblog Podcast. I'm Greg Migliore. We've got a great show for you today. We're going to talk about the electric Mustang. This is the Mach-E GT. Pretty excited to hear what James Riswick's take on that is. We're going to talk about the Mercedes EQS, which we've now both driven. James drove the Forester Wilderness, which seems like a little bit of an oxymoron, but hey, sometimes forests can be somewhat in, the suburbs. I digress. And we have some great mailbag and spend your money questions. So let's bring James in. How are you?
I'm doing good. I've been busy this last couple of weeks. It's been nice getting out into the world again.
Yeah, I echo that. I had some a group test sort of thing last week out in Ann Arbor, and just like consistently putting on like pants and like shoes and leaving your house for an extended period of time. It's really quite something. It really is, hey. But we're doing the podcast, at least I'm doing them in Puma sweatpants and an Autoblog hoodie. So it's Monday, it's raining. Hey, you got to still work from home at different points anyways. So like I said, we've got a great show. Let's just jump right in. The Mach-E GT is really the car we've all been, I'd say, excited about when it comes to the Mustang Mach-E, perhaps the most Mustang-y of the Mach-Es. What did you think of it?
It's definitely the most Mustang of the Mach-Es. And again, we I think we went on about for an hour about this, you and I, when the Mach-E came out, and said that like I compared it to like if the Macan and the Cayenne or a Porsche, then a Mach-E can the Mach-E. I say it like Mach-E sometimes, but the Mach-E can be a Mustang, no problem. It's a brand. Could it be a little more? Specifically the steering doesn't feel quite like a Mustang. That's one thing that a Macan and a Cayenne kind of share a little more with the 911. You have that feel to it. But nevertheless, I'm not bothered by the Mustang bit. Anyway, here's the GT deal. The Mach-E, still, like for a compact crossover, is incredibly sporty, and it has this great button-down suspension. Like, it can be fun on a winding mountain road, but it's still, you do feel the weight, you do feel the size. It's a little springy. Like, John Snyder, he compared the Mach-E and the Volkswagen ID4, and he said, actually the ID4 is a little more like tossable to drive here, which I rose a Spockian eyebrow to, but sure enough, he's absolutely correct. The GT, no, GT has they lower it by 10 millimeters. They also retuned the suspension, so this is notably firmer to the point that your passengers might complain, because it is a genuinely firmer sport tuned suspension, even with the magnetically controlled dampers, MagneRide, that you get with the GT Performance version of this. Honestly, the MagneRide didn't seem to do a lot for handling, at least in the environment I drove it on, and it didn't do much for the ride. Which means I wouldn't not get it, but it is not the kind of the magic wand that MagneRide can be in other vehicles. But here's the deal with the Mustang Mach-E GT. So this has 600 horsepower. 600 pound-feet of torque. Sorry, read the wrong detail. And then 480 horsepower. The GT Performance upgrades that to 634 pound-feet. So that's really the same 480 horsepower. And then it has stickier tires. And that's the reason why its 0 to 60 is 3.5 versus the GT's 3.8. It's not, the torque helps, but it's really the stickier tires. And, to put it into Tesla comparisons, because you kind of have to. The quickest Tesla Model 3 is 0.4 second quicker than the GT Performance. But, okay, fine. I will always argue that the Mach-E is more of a complete vehicle. It is more spacious. It has a much nicer interior. The build quality is superior, yada, yada, yada. Anyway, there's more to a car than a 0 to 60 time. Even its range, 270 miles for the GT. This is the same actually as the Mach-E Premium all-wheel drive. They share the same battery. GT Performance, 260 miles. Now again, this is less than a Model 3 Performance, which is 315 miles. But in real-world testing, the Mach-E has been getting a lot better than its EPA, whereas Teslas generally do just a little worse, just a little, which means that the difference between them in real world might not be actually that big. Again, consider it for what it's worth. So this is the Mustang Mach-E GT definitely is the most appealing version. I think it looks better. The key visual difference is that it has a blacked out grille. That's how you can tell it apart. I think it looks better as a result. The interior, you can get it with these nice bronze accent stitching as an option. And I think the biggest reason to get the GT Performance is not the extra torque, not the stickier tires, not even MagnaRide, it's the better seats. The ones in the Mustang, the regular Mach-E, are very flat and don't have a lot of lateral support. And they're kind of squishy, which is actually exactly like those in a regular Mustang. Hey, how about that? The ones in the Performance are a little firmer. They have a little more, just the right amount of extra lateral support. They're still not like the Recaros in a regular Mustang or like some AMG Performance seats. They're just kind of like regular, like firm, more supportive seats. I found them far more comfortable, and it's a real shame that they don't offer them throughout the Mach-E line. This should absolutely be an option on every Mach-E, or at least more than just like the absolute range-topping version. That's the Mach-E GT. I like it a whole heck of a lot. It starts at $61,000, but then of course there's a $7,500 federal tax credit. There's state level rebates, and the federal tax credit could be going up to $12,500 if certain variations of the infrastructure bill pass. So, neat car. I like it. Looks cool in yellow.
Sounds like a lot of car right there. And I think, right now, if you're in this kind of like price point and just certain levels of performance and, maybe you want a little more of a premium feel or more of a sporty feel, you've got a lot of options right now. I mean, I just drove the Polestar 2 a couple of weeks ago. Up and down the price point, you could go above or below the Mach-E, whether in GT or other guys. If you're in the market for something that's kind of sporty and, not tiny, you have choices. And it's interesting you mentioned some of the seats and some of the elements of the GT's interior. I actually thought when I drove the Mach-E earlier this year, the most maybe not jarring, but difference between a Mach-E and a regular Mustang was the interior. A regular Mustang's interior is, I think, quite retro. It's very analog. And that's great to me. And especially if you have the 5-liter V8 or something, you want that, kind of Steve McQueen vibe, if you will. But you get in the Mach-E and it's like, wow, touchscreen and this amazing, pad going down the middle. And it's very minimalistic, but also I'd say futuristic. So, I did like that, but I think there were some elements I thought, they could have maybe put a few more Mustang touches in there to kind of bring the whole execution home.
Yeah, and one area, actually, I was talking to the chief engineer, and it was the strangest thing. I ended up, due to logistics, on the wave devoted to EV journalists. Those are different cats, including guys who own multiple Teslas. And this was the bizarre thing where basically the chief engineer was interviewing the attendees. Oh wow! She had the notepad out and asking dude who owns 4 Teslas about this and that, and he did have some worthwhile, little bits, like how Blue Cruise operates, But one of the things we were talking, one thing we realized when talking to the chief engineer is that they have already updated the instrument panel on the car. An over-the-air update that was on the GT that was not on the cars that we have previously tested. Might not be over the air for all of them, but at least the cars we were driving, this is not a GT thing because it's not like it's overly GT-ish. It's not sportier looking. They have just altered the design, which shows the possibilities for the ease in which you can tweak these things. And I say that because, as I suggested to her, the gauges would be an easy way to add some of that Mustang character to it. What if there was like retro mode that you could just, like old skins on like media players that we used to have on our computers. Like you could just have retro mode where the gauges all of a sudden look more like a Mustang's, or you could change the fonts on the center stack. Just like something like that, where digitally you could add a little more Mustang character. Like the regular Mustang has gauges and has had gauges since the last generation that you could change the lighting on. You could go in and you could turn it into the Joker, get a purple with green if you wanted, which was always a great prank to pull when it was a long-term car. But like you can't do that on the Mach-E. It would be infinitely easier, you'd figure, to do it on a screen versus actual gauges. Yes, I agree. A retro interior in this car would be nonsense because it's a futuristic car. But like a couple of, subtle details would be possible, specifically because of the digital nature of so much of that interior.
So I think you maybe have a future in product planning. I know every now and then a journalist kind of goes over to that side, maybe not PR, but you go straight into product planning or some sort of in-house testing. I've heard of it happen, but I think that's a pretty good suggestion. And I think when you look at some of the things they can do, especially with over-the-air updates and just the ways you can make the interiors configure to whatever you want them to be, that would be a good one, I think. I mean, football teams wear throwback uniforms. Sunday, throwback Thursday for the Mach-E, and
yeah,
I could get into it. So speaking of cars of the future, let's transition over to the Mercedes EQS, which I was reading your review this morning, and it really, my thoughts line up with it. I think we've both driven a fair amount of cars, some of them very technical, some of them not. But I mean, this one for me really takes the cake. I mean, you have a line in there too about this is about, the top, the most over-the-top, amazing technical tour de force or something that you've ever driven. This is the
most complex car I have ever tested. Is the direct quote.
There you go. I mean, I think my sentence with about 15 different clauses is, the EQS equivalent of this car. It's something. I mean, there's so much to unpack. So you drove it right after the Mach-E GT, and I was driving it actually for our Autoblog Tech of the Year. We're testing out part of the M-Bucks, if you will, not part of it, all of it. And there's a lot of it.
Yeah.
A lot to unpack. I actually had driven an S-Class a few days before where I spent more time with the 3D thing in front of the driver, which I found to be not what I was looking for. I thought that was a little jarring. I had a bit of a headache. That didn't help. But the rest of it, I think, is really quite something as far as, the M-Bucks infotainment. I mean, there's the amount of maps you can have streaming across your car, across multiple screens, is just unbelievable.
Three. Three.
I mean, Magellan didn't have this level of topography.
There's different views too. You can have, they're totally different views. Yeah. Because it's because you can have the one in front of the driver, which is kind of normal. Audi Virtual Cockpit debuted that years ago. But then you can have one on the 17.7 inch central touchscreen, and then you can have one on the one in front of the passenger. And the passenger one is basically the same thing that you would get in another Mercedes. The central one is a slightly different interface in the EQS than the new S-Class and the one that's standard on the EQS. It's called the Hyperscreen. They've made a couple of key I'd say improvements to it that I found made it a little easier to use, because MBUX I'm not a fan. I find it very overwhelming, and there's not enough placed on the screen relative its size. Anyway, but the thing about the passenger screen, it's kind of silly. Like, does a passenger need a screen? No, but this is also like a flagship luxury car. Like, what percentage of the things in this car do you actually need? Like, very few. So,
including the car itself, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So we're already well beyond the well, you don't really need this world. But like, having the map in front of me was kind of nice, because I could follow along and say, hey, we have a left turn coming up here, I could play with the radio, I could play with the settings, meanwhile not bother the driver, take away their screen, what they're looking at, which is kind of nice. Like, if I want to, there are so many options in this car. You have 11,000 way front seats with ventilation and heating. Meanwhile, the driver needs to know where they're going or would like to change the channel. Like, great. I mean, you do have to watch it. If you're on a winding road and you're looking at the passenger seat, there's a very good passenger screen. There's a very good chance you will end up barfing on the passenger screen. But yeah, so that's the thing about this car. Those screens, the hyper screen that it's called in the EQS, really is like this great big part of the car, because it is unique to the EQS. But the rest of the car, it shares its bones with the S-Class. Now, I have not driven that car, but the same suspension technology is on board. It's very similar in size. However, the body shape does result in it not having nearly as much rear headroom. It's more like a CLS in terms of its back seat than an S-Class. It's not a limo. It does have the hatchback rear to it, so it's kind of like an Audi A7 in that manner. But there are two versions. There's the EQS 450 Plus, which has 350 miles of range, and then the EQS 580 4MATIC, meaning it's all-wheel drive, that has 340 miles. This thing weighs 5,600 pounds, which is 900 more than an S580. So, batteries weigh a lot, kids. So the EQS 450 Plus has 329 horsepower, 419 pound-feet of torque, and the 580 has 516 horsepower and 631 pound-feet of torque. So actually, they're kind of the Mustang Mach-E GT is in between the two. It does 0 to 60 in 4.1 seconds. That's the EQS 580. Now, again, that is slower than a Plaid or a Taycan Turbo S. But here's the important point about that. This is a totally different car than those. The EQS is, kind of like the CLS version of an S-Class, and it's just like this palatially beautiful riding on a cloud of air luxury sedan. The ride on this is exceptional. This is the quietest car I have ever been in. I was just kind of carrying on a light conversation with the person next to me while driving in like downtown San Francisco on like not great roads on the highway. Like a Mach-E or a Model S Plaid is not that's fine. It's just not. It's a totally different car. The Taycan Turbo S is a completely different car. And this was kind of the cool thing, because I drove the EQS and the Mach-E GT on the exact same day. It could, they're so different. It's potential that they could, negatively impact one another as a result. But no, they're so different. And that's great, because it shows that not only are we getting really great, interesting, not only like great electric cars, they're incredibly interesting, and we're getting a diverse selection of them. Like this, we were originally concerned that we're just going to get like emotionless transport pods that were electric. That is not the case. These are some of the most interesting cars that are out there, not just from a technical perspective. They're definitely interesting for that, but like a Mach-E GT is a cool car. This EQS is a cool car. And that's great. Like, that's really exciting. It kind of shows that, like, it won't be all doom and gloom because of EVs. In fact, like, I find an increasing number of gas-powered cars kind of boring now. They all have 2-liter turbo engines. They're probably in a compact SUV. Snore. These are interesting. These are totally different. Like, within a model range, you have different batteries, and you add all-wheel drive, and the performance increases, and there's a lot of different options and customization because of that, and what's best for you. They're interesting. That's great.
So it's interesting you say that. I had a slightly different sample set, slightly different. I drove the S-Class, like the new S-Class, for a little bit, a few days before I drove the EQS. And after driving them both, my just like gut reaction was, give me the electric one. It's so much more interesting, compelling, futuristic than the S-Class. It just, the way it handled, the way it was laid out, the way it looked, it really felt like a car of the future. And part of me was thinking, in 10 years, this will be the S-Class, and this other dinosaur that I drove that had basically a very similar infotainment setup, many of the same elements, not quite as big of like screen interface. Nothing is as big as this EQS screen interface. I easily had TVs in college that were smaller than several of these screens to play like NHL 96 on or something. But like, that is like, just, it's such a tour de force compared to like even a conventional powered like sibling. So, there's that. And I think, another thing that really stood out to me was the HUD. I really thought for the driver, that was actually useful. The AR piece of it. We had the nav set, and we were going to this place that was a little bit like probably 60 miles away. I vaguely knew where I was going. And it was really good about saying, hey, and there were like arrows that come out in front of you and are actively telling you which way to go, and it's in front of the driver. This isn't brand new technology. I mean, even on like Corvettes from like 6-7 years ago, a similar like display is there, only that's showing you like horsepower and lap times and things like that. But this is just, I think it's very usable like interface. So I was a little surprised at how much I liked that piece of the technology. Yeah, it's quick. I drove the one with 516 horsepower, and yeah, I mean, it's in a way, it's like old school luxury where it's not so much the car is quick to be like a performance machine. It's quick and powerful because you're paying 6 figures, and that's what you would expect. So I like that. It reminds me of, there's no replacement for just power. And when you're not talking about displacement and internal combustion engines, just power up the batteries. Let's go. So, there's definitely a bit of a gee whiz feel to the whole thing. The interior, like if you could get past the screens, the one I tested out was this like very creamy white with ambient lighting. And I give credit to MBooks for like making it, before it was like 3 graphics, now it's like 8 or 9 graphics in the main screen. So you can get to different things a lot easier than you used to be able to. The oversimplification made it harder because you just had to drill deeper. Now it's like, okay, comfort, vehicle, navigation. So we had a lot of fun dressing up the different ambient lighting. I tell you what, that interior, drive the EQS like at dusk. Wow, that's just like a beautiful experience with the lights and the light creamy interior. Very roomy in there. We're going to get to we have a question about the Subaru Ascent and the spend my money question. And this car is longer than that. So that just speaks to how big it is, but it handles pretty well. Like, I used to be way more intimidated by the S-Class and the 7 Series than I guess I am now, which is probably a attribute of age. But this car does handle pretty well for that, given its dimensions. And I put a car seat in there. We actually got some mud on the seats, which at first I had a bit of a heart attack, but easy to clean up with paper towels and a little bit of Clorox, and away we go. It was no problem. Had activating massage while driving it. So Yeah, in some ways, very practical, even though I'm sure that's not the intent. But just given the footprint of it, it's a good sized vehicle. And I really liked the hatch thing going on in the back. Put a ton of stuff in there. I put a little scooter in there, like a day bag, like just everything we needed when we were gone for like close to 13 hours on Saturday, and very, very practical. Sometimes you wouldn't expect it in this sort of vehicle, but everything you need. So, I mean, overall, it's a very good experience and very, I would say, illuminating too.
Yeah, and it's because of that. I mean, because of the hatch capability, and because the backseat isn't like the limo, this is definitely more intended to be like owner like driven.
Yeah,
and this is more like a day-to-day driver car. And yeah, it is a lot bigger than you think, because it does have, because of its so rounded look and because it's cab forward, you squint a bit and it's like, it's kind of like the same shape as like the last generation Hyundai Elantra or like a Chevy Cruze. Like it kind of has that general shape to it. So that's just hard to, if it's rounded and it's cab forward because it doesn't have an engine, it's just going to kind of look like that. But like in person, you really get the size and the scale of it a lot more. And I do, it's a little weird. It's definitely different. But I think that's the right move. It needs to look totally different from the rest of the Mercedes line. Like you really need to telegraph strongly that something's electric. And, Audi didn't really do that all that well with e-tron. Everything named e-tron. Like there's not like really much to tell you that it's electric. And to get noticed, that makes a difference. Like the Model S came out and that was a different looking car. It also had a big black shield on the front. So, I think that's smart. Now, will the next generation S-Class, if that's exclusively electric, will, the EQS die and that just becomes the S-Class? Maybe. But for now, having two clear, different lines, I think is very smart for them. Yeah, makes sense to me. And this thing's really cool. I like this thing a lot.
It's pretty much how I feel. Let's really shift gears back into almost the past. Subaru Forester Wilderness.
Yeah.
Did you get a chainsaw? Did you put that in there? Maybe a gas-powered chainsaw? Or you didn't even have a power tool. You just had like a manual, like an axe and a shovel to go into the wilderness. I don't know.
We went into the wilderness, that's for sure.
I'm sure you did. Anything that they called the wilderness, they probably made you guys go up like a wall or something of rock just to prove to you that it's capable. How was it?
It's funny. My main image of this is on an outcropping with Mount Jefferson here in Oregon behind me. It is the best photo I've ever taken. It looks fake. It actually looks like it looks like the Subaru like New York Auto Show stand, because there's looks like there's a fake backdrop behind it. Central Oregon right now, there's just because it started to rain here, that means it's starting to snow at elevation, and you just have the snow-capped volcanic peaks of Central Oregon, and it's just gorgeous. So we're driving around there, more off-road than on-road. So I should probably explain what the hell the Forester Wilderness is. So the Wilderness, like the Outback Wilderness, is the AMG of Subaru ruggedness. So, it is every Forester, just like everything not named BRZ. Well, that's not true. Crosstrek and Forester and Outback and Ascent all have 8.7 inches of ground clearance, which is really exceptional. That is the best in the compact crossover segment, tying only the Cherokee Trailhawk. Other Cherokees are lower. However, the Wilderness increases that ground clearance by half an inch, so it has 9.2 inches. That is done by actually lengthening the springs and the dampers as opposed to just adding suspension spacers, which is usually what happens when you lift a vehicle. And also, unlike an aftermarket lift, they have recalibrated the Subaru EyeSight driver assistance system, so it's actually looking at the right height for the car. But besides just lifting it, they also changed the front bumper, kind of increasing the angle, the lower angle of the bumper lip, added a aluminum skid plate, and also brought in the corners of the bumper a bit. And as a result, the approach and departure angles are up by about 3 degrees off from the Forester and the Outback Wilderness. So the Outback Wilderness is actually a little higher off the ground. It's 9.5 inches. The Forester isn't that high because it would crash into something in the factory, apparently, if it was any taller. But like, who cares? I think you're still good as the highest thing in the segment. It's taller than a Land Cruiser, actually.
Wow, so that's an interesting little factoid right there.
Yeah. The approach angles and the departure angles are better than the Outback Wilderness because there's more overhang in the Outback. And again, those are better than the Cherokee Trailhawk still kind of aces it considerably in terms of those. But every other version of the Cherokee is way below it. So you have to get like the specific range topping Cherokee to match this. And this is about $3,000 to $4,000 less than that. Ditto the RAV4 TRD off-road, which is kind of comparable to this. Now, this still has the exact same extremely meh engine in it. There's nothing to really write home about. Let me look at what the exact figures. It's like 173 horsepower. It's nothing much. But the CVT has been altered. The ratios of it have been effectively, it's a CVT, but it has simulated gear ratios. And so the lower ones have been lengthened for improved just response off-road. As a result, it feels a little quicker, even though it really probably isn't. Also, what it does is there's something called X mode. They've added scenarios for it. There's, deep snow and sand, and then well, there's 2 different versions of X mode. Forgive me. And what this does, besides the normal throttle calibration and traction stability control calibration, it changes the CVT ratio even further, so that when it automatically engages the hill descent control and kind of gives you a de facto low range. So when I was going down, kind of a moderate hill, I didn't have to engage hill descent control. It was already engaged, and it just kind of like used the transmission to inch me down, kind of one pedal driving, kind of like you would get with a low range. And then when I had, the full on like sinking ship downhill, that's when you had the typical kind of pulsing brakes, hill descent control. And again, I didn't need to engage it. And this is a key thing about this car, because this car is kind of like off-roading for dummies. And as an off-roading dummy, I feel that it's very useful. Like, this is not a vehicle for off-roaders. This is not something that, where like you just go someplace to drive in difficult situations. This is one where you might find yourself in difficult situations in order to get to somewhere, to go hiking, to go camping. And the Forester, amongst people who go hiking, who go camping, who go outdoors, is already the most popular vehicle in the segment. Cherokee, they kind of go back and forth depending on, if you're looking at camping or whether you're looking at hiking. But either way, it's up there, and this is leaning into that further. This extra ground clearance, the better clearances, the more the all-terrain tires that it has. This 17-inch all-terrain tires. It has greater capability, and it's this amount of capability that really does make it better suited for just to going on lighter off-road trails to get to some place, not like you're just there to do it. And I tell you, the ride and handling on dirt roads was exceptional. Like, the really great ride quality. We're going along there. It's a bumpy road. I'm like, this isn't just like, this is actually legitimately comfortable. You could go on here for a long time. And you know, the steering, which is kind of numb on center and nothing to write home about on road, was like really good off road. Like, on, you know, we were not driving slowly on this off road or on this dirt road, and was very capable of avoiding potholes. And if we did hit a pothole, that suspension was really capable of sopping it up, and you're kind of bracing yourself for impact. But nope, kind of did its job. You know, extra suspension travel and recalibrated dampers and lots of tire sidewall. Go figure. It's good at doing that. So, you know, I was really impressed with this. And again, it's not as expensive as those other ones because it's not a range topping trim. It's a mid grade, like the touring version that has more equipment in it. You know, it's more expensive than this. So I really like this thing. I think it looks a lot cooler because the regular Forester, pretty dorky. And, yeah, this looks a lot better.
I think I like that play for Subaru to have this kind of in the middle of the lineup, so you don't have to like get everything that maybe you don't necessarily want just to get that off-road capability. I think it's nice that you could sort of, some people, I'm not sure, I don't know if they said what the take rate is, but I feel like some people might even buy this partially for the looks, which I always try to caution people against. Like, don't buy something if it looks that way, if you're going to just waste all of the capability. But I mean, it does look cool. I think they kind of swung and missed with the most recent Forester. I feel like it got a little too angular. I like this. This is good. To a lesser extent, I have the same thoughts about the Outback. This is a fun one.
I will say, so the trade-off here is 3 miles per gallon. It goes from 29 miles per gallon combined to 26.
Not
now,
nothing.
that is still better than the Bronco Sport. It is way better than the Cherokee Trailhawk, which is V6 only. Of course, it has a V6, so it's a lot quicker. And it's worse than a TRD off-road. Now, I haven't done a full deep dive, but this should be, just given by ground clearance alone, this should be more capable off-road than a TRD off-road RAV4. The other thing is there's not as much of a drivability trade-off with this than the Outback Wilderness. That thing has some very kind of borderline spooky steering response when you add all of that ride height to the Outback, and you have those all-terrain tires paired to just whatever the baseline Outback situation is. There was a definite degradation in drivability and handling. There was not as much with this Forester. I thought it was, I drove it back to back with a CRV hybrid, and although that is, has quicker steering, it is sharper on road. It is not like the great chasm that the Outback Wilderness would be. So there's just not as much of a trade-off with this. So I liked besides the fuel economy, I would say that this is without question the Forester to get, because it does. There are tangible improvements. I mean, again, if you're never going to go off-road, meaning like you're never going to go on, like, even get it like dirty on a dirt road, like you don't need it. That's for sure. But it's not going to, I wouldn't shoo you off it, even if you just were like, yeah, that looks cool, I want it because it looks cool. I'm like, okay. Yeah,
it's your money. Spend it,
Yeah.
I mean, plus I imagine it's probably not terrible in the winter. If you're going to be somewhere that has snow, take a little extra ground clearance and some beefy tires, and hey,
that's true.
Away you go.
Yeah.
Close out the drive section here with just a quick note. I spent a lot of time in the Toyota Camry Hybrid and XSE trim. It was bright red, had a beautiful interior. And just a couple of real quick thoughts here. It reminded me, one, not everybody is going to be in a full-on electric anytime soon. And by not everybody, I mean almost everybody is not going to be in a full-on electric. If you're looking to just get something that's a little more fuel efficient with hybrid technology, which is readily available right now, cars like the Camry Hybrid could really meet your needs. I was getting 40 miles per gallon on long round trips, like 60 miles one way and back, or like almost 120 miles actually round trip. It's just a very good everyday car. So stuff like that, like I almost feel like cars like this easily get lost in the shuffle. The Camry Hybrid itself starts at like about 33, talking 44 miles per gallon in the city, 47 highway. I don't think I quite got those numbers. I also wasn't tracking them, very, religiously, but I was definitely paying attention to my fuel economy. And quite simply, it's a big car with a big trunk that's quite fuel efficient. It looks pretty good. You could put people and stuff in it. Let me put it this way, right here, right now, to quote, what was that, the Pepsi One commercial from 20 years ago, that this will fit your green car needs. So, that was kind of my overwhelming takeaway. Is it going to excite anybody? No, because it looks just like a Toyota Camry, although an XSE trim looked pretty sporty. Yep. So, this, if you're in the market for a hybrid, don't forget that right here, right now, you can get them. And if you want to do a plug-in, sure, there's not the Camry, but there's other ones out there in different spaces and segments and OEMs. But that was just I was very impressed with it because I drove it for a week, didn't have to fill it up, didn't have to even think about fuel economy because I was getting good fuel economy. It was comfortable. I wasn't driving like a penalty box. And it just as you could hear from this podcast, I was driving much more exciting things, but this is a great car for a week for my test cycle to just enjoy. And frankly, I think to me that almost speaks to the fact that how good of a daily driver it is for many people.
Yeah, actually, I had that car. I had it for a week in LA, and I absolutely agree with you. And Accord Hybrid ditto. That's the powertrain to get in those. And I have the CR-V Hybrid right now. That's the one to get.
Yes,
I'm getting 33 miles. I got 33 miles per gallon from here to Bend, which is a 3-hour drive and back. You're driving up and over the Cascades, so that's not the best. Truth be told, that is not the best powertrain if you're going to be making cross mountain journeys a lot. That said, the fuel economy is so much better than a regular one. And that's the same thing with a Camry. It's the same thing with an Accord. It's the same thing with a Toyota Highlander and a Kia Sorento hybrid. Their fuel economy is so much better than name a competitor that, it automatically makes them that much more competitive. Like a regular Toyota Highlander is kind of small. It's is it that much? It's not anywhere close to as good as a Telluride. But when you add that 10 miles per gallon, yeah, it elevates it considerably. And if you're talking about let's all lower our carbon footprint, let's reduce the amount of gas we're burning, well, you don't have to go all the way to electric, because frankly we're not there yet. Most people don't have the budget yet for that. But if we all just go to just the more people who are buying hybrids, that's a lot less gas that you are burning in the meantime. And it's existing technology that works fine. Now, again, this CR-V, it would not be my choice, but I'm not buying a CR-V anyway. So, because I find it kind of boring. Well, if you have a boring engine in a boring car, who cares? You're still at the same level. So, it doesn't really matter. But to the point with the Camry, that's actually a more interesting engine. than the regular one. And because of the battery pack location of both the Accord and the Camry, it's under the back seat. All that weight is in between the axles down low in the car, and those are more balanced cars as a result than the V6 or the 4-cylinder. The chief engineer of the Camry told me, like, yeah, actually that's the hybrid is the sharpest one to drive. And he was the one who made sure that he was of such the belief that hybrid can be applied to sporty applications. He made sure that the RAV4 XSE, the sportiest trim level, was only available in a hybrid because it was the most powerful version, and for some of the same reasons that I just mentioned in terms of like balance. So
the fun car to drive. You're glued to the expressway, as they say. I mean, it's, all those things you laid out. That's how I felt driving it. It was fun. Let's move on to the off-roader dimension segment, if you will. I actually forgot to tease this off the top. So, hey, a little bit of an Easter egg here, but the off-roader luggage test. I'm going to tee this up by saying, for somebody like me who might buy a Wrangler or a Bronco or a 4Runner or something if I were ever in the market for a car, but then you try to think practically, this is one of the practical things that I would get into as somebody with a kid and a dog and a family. Like, well, which one can I actually put things in? That's frankly why I always would pick like the 4Runner or the Wrangler, etc., over, say, the Gladiator or the Taco, because the SUV body style really works for my life. So you had a nice luggage test, if you will, which is kind of a good way to illustrate this. You put all the like interior cargo volume numbers. Who even knows what that means half the time? But when you're like, hey, I got a luggage, this is the luggage test, it makes a lot more sense. So did you have a verdict, or did you just, what do you think here, James?
Well, I mean, okay, so I did not do these at the same time. So I did not put the exact same items in them, and I did these months and possibly like more than a year apart. That said, I do the same baseline luggage in all of them. So you can see side to side which has the most room left over. Ultimately, nothing comes close to the 4Runner. Of course, the numbers say that. Then you go to the Bronco, and then the Defender, and then the Wrangler Unlimited behind that. Now, this all kind of shakes out in the numbers. However, the gap is a lot greater with the Wrangler than it might seem. The thing with the Wrangler is it has like a lot of... This is the thing with cargo capacity numbers. It's effectively like, if you think about it, the capacity is like if you just like filled it up with ping pong balls or styrofoam peanuts or something, but that's not luggage, right? So if you have like weird shapes and alcoves in a trunk, or like in the situation with the Bronco and the Wrangler, you have like diagonal support beams that take up space in the vehicle. So like, how do you you could put a bunch of like a pillow to the right of it, maybe, or maybe a bag, but like it really depends. So in this, that was one of the elements that made the Wrangler a little less useful, is that diagonal support beam is more inboard than it is on the Bronco. Now, there's 2 points of this. One, it's like, yeah, I guess you could put things on the outside of those support beams, but that's only if you have the roof on. If you have it off, then the Bronco definitely has more space, and it has more space regardless. So I was able to put all 6 pieces of luggage in it. I was able to put a 38-quart cooler in the Bronco. I was able to put an additional duffel bag, a folded up gigantic child's hiking carrier, and the 2 front roof panels in the Bronco, in addition to all 6 pieces of luggage. The Wrangler, I was able to fit the long, skinny, folded up pack and play in a duffel bag. So a lot less extra stuff. Now, could I have loaded it up more to the roof or something? Sure. I mean, you can always do that, but I prefer to only load up to the back seat, just of safety. And, if you're loading stuff up to the roof, you have to account to the fact that it might fly forward, and that's not good. So
you really don't want a pack and play flying at your head or any of your children's head.
No. Which is why I don't do
they're
that.
quite the projectiles.
Yeah. But the thing is, the Wrangler, I would say, is definitely the least useful. It's the narrowest space. The Bronco and the Defender and the 4Runner all benefit from being giant boxes, and that's always easier to load things on. It's fine. I mean, you can still fit a lot of stuff in a Wrangler Unlimited. It's just not as big as the other ones.
It's, that's an interesting, I think, sort of small, mark in the Bronco's favor as far as everyday livability. Maybe not even a small mark, but I thought the Bronco versus the Wrangler, as far as their on-road driving and handling characteristics, the Bronco, I think, is considerably better. It's easier. You're a little more confident. There's things you could do with a Bronco that with a Wrangler, you might get a little more nervous, get that kind of tip over feeling. Maybe you might actually tip over. I don't know. But I mean, just when I think of suburban cruising, a Bronco is probably slightly better than a Wrangler. Now, you want to go off-road, that's a whole different podcast, an argument for a different day. They're actually both very capable. But, just that, I was whipping through back roads in the Bronco, and I was like, this thing handles okay. The Wrangler is better than it was in the last generation. It's much better than it was 20 years ago. It's definitely still a little bit of a handful at times, though. There's things you want to be careful with when you're in a Wrangler. Same with the Bronco, but Ford did some things with the suspension settings that make it feel a little more stable. And then when you say, hey, I could get a little bit more into it, that's where when you start to think, well, hey, what is my use case for this thing? I'm going to go camping. I'm going to maybe go do a little bit of off-roading. Okay, maybe I don't need the nuclear weapon that is the Jeep Wrangler Rubicon. Maybe what I need is more of a basic Bronco where I'm getting, a little bit more space. It's a little more comfortable for me to drive to the cider mill, where I'm just going to park on some grass, and that's my off-roading use case. So, that in a way I would say it's just an interesting argument for real world living. So
yeah, I will say though, it is loud, loud. Byron wasn't entirely sure. It's not louder than the Wrangler even.
I don't disagree with you. It's loud.
I had the roof, not only the hard top, but the hard top with the mousy acoustic stuff on it. And wow, yeah, we did not need the sound machine for the baby sleeping in the back seat. That was for sure.
There you go.
So if you're going to be driving, if you don't intend to take it off road and you're just like, wow, that thing's cool, I like that as my daily driver, be warned.
Yeah.
That it's not a quiet vehicle. That's for sure. A 4Runner, which is itself not a very quiet vehicle, is like a Lincoln by comparison.
Yeah. That is your Aviator compared to either of those two vehicles.
Yeah,
I tell that to people all the time.
Land Rover, the Defender, holy crap, that's a huge difference. Same with ride quality too.
Yeah.
If you're wondering why it costs so much more, that's why it costs so much more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, since we're talking about spending money, let's go to the mailbag and let's spend some money. First, we do have just a mailbag question. We were talking about the GV70 back on podcast 696. Sari in Canada writes in, regular listener. That's great. Thanks for listening. Sharing some details about, his experience of the GV70 2.5. He's had it for almost a month. He's from Canada. There you go, James. James is Canadian. There you go. And this is just kind of like an experience, so I appreciate that. You are correct. The two rotary knobs are confusing. Yes, but he says after a month, you get used to it. I drove the car or the crossover for a week, and it bugged me. But by the end of the week, I was sort of okay with it. I think that's kind of maybe where you landed too, James. You weren't that angry about it, but I don't know.
Yeah, it's Yeah, I mean, like I could get used to it, but then there's a lot of things we get used to because we drive a lot of cars.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah.
So
it doesn't mean it's not a safety issue.
Anyways, he likes it. Ride and handling is excellent. It's a fixed price in Canada, so no extra charges, all-inclusive 5-year service included. Need to buy my next car in Canada. This sounds great. Online booking. Can't talk about long-term, obviously, viability because it's only been a month or so. Definitely different than any other SUV in the market. Many people have asked about it. I had the same experience, and he is seeing more and more Genesis cars on the road. Same. So, yeah, I don't know. Maybe I need to head over to Windsor and buy my next car if I can do that. I know it's not that easy, but
no, I mean, you'll be also paying a lot more money for it.
Right, right.
In fact, that's a terrible idea, Greg. Don't do that.
Yeah. Well, plus border crossing is quite challenging right now too. So
yeah, and the speedometers and the rise and
yeah, no, that's true. Although
I guess that has a digital thing, so that at least would be easy enough to.
You used to be able to go over there and check out like the B class or something, things, you know, that you'd see in Ontario that you wouldn't see in Michigan.
Oh, sure. Yeah, you know. Oh, yeah. I once upon a time wrote up the buying guide for every car sold in Canada, having to do it's all the specs and in metric and translated all into French. That was fun.
Okay.
Yeah, specs in French. Yeah.
Speaking of French, I was in Quebec City a few years ago, and the EcoSport, which I believe they just added this option, you could get a tire on the back of it or something. So that's kind of cool. But up in Quebec City, just tires are on the back of those things. They're on snow tires, and that's just how they were rolling around the old town, if you will. So before we turn into Automotive News Canada, I guess we should actually spend some money here. And let's see, comes from Ian in Washington, D.C. Been listening since 2012. Thanks a lot, Ian. Rely on the show to get me through some yard work and chores every week. I will refer you to our electric power tools guide from a couple of weeks ago if you're interested. Give a little plug for that. The family 2019 Subaru Ascent Touring was wrecked last week, and they're in the market for something new. They love the Ascent, but if they had one complaint, it was that they found it a tad too large for the city at times. Here's the issue. They have 2 kids and they go on 8+ hour road trips 2 or 3 times per year. So they need the space and in a pinch, the 3rd row. What are some good 3-row options that are smaller than the Ascent? Budget is up to 60 grand. The new Kia Sorento is on their radar. Thanks, says Ian. Thank you for writing. I'll kick it over to you, James. You did a piece on the best 3rd row specific SUVs. Many of these are actually as big, if not larger, than the Ascent. Yeah. Luckily for you, Ian, car companies seem to be obsessed with jamming a 3rd row into almost everything. So you've got some options here. And I've got some thoughts here too. But I will, again, kick it over to you, James.
Sorento should be on your radar. I think that's your best bit. That's the one that's definitively smaller than an Ascent. Like a Highlander is technically smaller, but you mostly notice it with the interior, which I don't think is really what you want. The Sorento, I think, is absolutely the right size because it is a 3-row crossover, but it is like noticeably smaller than the others without, being cramped. Like in terms of in a pinch 3rd row, like that's what you're looking for. And to our earlier point about hybrids, you can get a hybrid.
Yes.
And that would be great because its fuel economy is much, much better than all those 3-row crossovers with V6s and such. And the Highlander too. Actually, the Highlander hybrid, I mean, it is technically smaller than the Ascent. I don't think you'd notice it as much as you would with the Sorento, but both those hybrids are really good. The other suggestion I would have is the Mazda CX-9. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if its exterior dimensions are kind of similar to the Ascent. However, it drives a lot smaller. It feels more like a sporty car, or rather, if you're used to driving a sporty car, driving a large family vehicle will be made less depressing by the fact that you're in a Mazda CX-9. Really lovely interior as well. So those would be my 2 suggestions.
I'm going to kind of go all over the place here. Sorento hybrid, yes. Regular Sorento, maybe if you're interested, but I would go hybrid just because why not?
Yeah.
The Tiguan has 3 rows. Speaking of vehicles, you can jam a 3rd row in. might be one you want to check out. So that's out there. The 4Runner, I believe, does have a third row. Some of them do, depending on the model you pick. Now, that's a little unconventional. It's a large vehicle, but it is dimensionally shorter than the Ascent. So something to consider. I will say this. You're going to want to drive the 4Runner before you decide that's what path you want to go down. It's, the infotainment's old. It's pretty large and like square, if you will. You can put a lot of stuff in it. I'll say that. I drove around with it for a bunch of family errands this summer. We had one for a weekend, and my family loved it. Not everybody will. I'll say that, so something to consider, but that's kind of a fun one I'll throw in there. And then the Volvo Xc90 has 3 rows, and you can find a very basic one for under your $60,000 threshold. Yeah. So, more option to consider there. I do think the Sorento Hybrid is probably pretty close to like just to give you a straight answer. That's a good, people don't like it when you sort of hem and haw and give them 5 different answers. If you want one answer, I think that's a pretty good one. But all the things I just laid out there, I think are things you might want to at least Google, maybe take for a test drive as well and see where you're at. So, and then, depending on how much driving in the city is like a problem for you, you might say, maybe you go back up. The CX-9 is large. I believe it's actually even larger than the Ascent dimension-wise. You might say that doesn't matter. Or, look at it like an Outback or something too. That could fit in your like kind of wheelhouse as well. It's tricky when I'll say this, like having a family, I have not had a thought once, I want a smaller car. I'm always thinking I want more space. So I sort of kind of relate with that, like that need, but I'll also say there is a limit, it doesn't sound like you want to, start checking out Tahoes or anything. So, check out one of those and please write back. Let us know what you think. So, any final thoughts there, James? Is it still raining in Oregon?
Sporadically. We're getting, I think, some, the outer edges of that bomb cyclone. We're getting some pretty gusty stuff here. It's stormy as opposed to the normal, drizzle.
That's what we're on. I think we're getting the very outer edges because it's still raining here in Michigan. So we'll leave it there, I guess. Send us your questions. Your Spend My Moneys at podcast@autoblog.com. If you love the podcast, and we hope you do, please give us a 5-star rating wherever you get your podcasts. Be safe out there, stay dry, and we'll see you next week.